By the end of this video, you will understand just how elite of a wide receiver prospect Giants rookie Malik Nabers is. We're going to take a look at his workout metrics, some advanced stats of his average draft position in redraft, dynasty startups, and dynasty rookie drafts, hit rates historically for top 10 wide receivers, take a look at the depth chart and where he projects to be there, as well as which routes he excels at and routes that he could improve. And finally, we're going to take a look at his QB situation, as well as what we can expect from him in the short term and in the long term. Malik Nabers is 6 feet, 200 pounds. He has 40th percentile arm length and is 21 years and 1 month old, so very young for a prospect coming out. He just turned 21. When we look at his workout metrics, he ran an unofficial 4.35 at his pro day. Player Profiler gives him a 4.40, which would still be in the 92nd percentile. So it might have been a 4.38, somewhere around there, which would have been a little bit better. But using a 4.40 40-yard dash, that gives him a 105.3 speed score, which is still 85th percentile, which is incredibly impressive considering he's only 6 foot, 200 pounds. When we look at his burst score, his 135.9 score is in the 98th percentile. He has an incredible vertical and broad jump that helps him be explosive. See, players with a very high burst score are generally deemed as more explosive players because it helps you get going quickly. He didn't perform in any agility drills, so we don't have anything for them there, but his 10.18 catch radius is in the 80th percentile. So above the board here, a tremendous athlete. He's best comparable to Jamar Chase, and you'll find at the end, that's not going to be my actual player comp for him, but he does have traits of Jamar Chase. So in dynasty rookie drafts, in a 12-team format, Caleb Williams is going first overall. This is sleeper ADP, by the way. MHJ goes second, Nabers goes third, Jaden Daniels goes fourth, Rome goes fifth, Brock Bowers goes sixth, and Drake May goes seventh. So in a 12-team format, I can definitely understand, and I would have Caleb first. I would still have him first in a 10-team, and if you were in a greater than 12-team format, I don't see how you could afford to not take Caleb there. He's a great player in a fantastic situation, the best situation I've ever even heard of for a number 1 pick. Then in a 10-team format, because every team can have 3 starting quarterbacks, I could definitely understand taking MHJ at 2. However, in a 12-team format, you could definitely argue Jaden Daniels there. Then at 3, we have Malik Nabers. In a 12-team format, I would still probably rather have Jaden Daniels because, once again, all 12 teams can't have 3 starting quarterbacks. And if you are in a greater than 12-team league, I don't know how you could possibly not take a quarterback there. But in a 12-team format, theoretically, if you are set at quarterback and you cannot trade down with anybody, or you think that if you trade down, they're just going to take Malik Nabers there, then I could definitely understand taking him if you just don't need a quarterback. But man, having 3 starting quarterbacks is a must so that you can field an optimal lineup. Then at 4 in a 12-team format is Jaden Daniels. I think that's a little bit low. In a 10-team, I could definitely understand him at 4. Then Rome at 5 is fine. Brock Bowers at 6 is fine. And Drake May at 7 is fine. In a 12-team format, I'd probably have Drake May a little bit higher. And if it's greater than 12 teams, he should be probably 3rd. But regardless, in a 10-team format, I think Malik Nabers is going in a fine spot. In a 12-team format, I'd probably rather have him at 4. But he's incredibly talented, and when I say that, it's just due to the value of the quarterback position, specifically in a 12-team format. In dynasty startups, he's going as the wide receiver 10 off the board. Garrett Wilson goes 7th. Puka's 6th, by the way. Tyreek Hill's 8th. A.J. Brown's 9th. Nabers is 10th. Then he's followed by Olave and Drake London. In terms of the pecking order here, I would probably have Puka, who's going at 6 before Nabers. I'd probably have Garrett Wilson going before him. Tyreek Hill, in my opinion, would depend on your team build. If you're trying to punt, obviously it would make no sense to draft Tyreek Hill. Then A.J. Brown is in his prime. He's been a regular top 10 wide receiver, so I could definitely understand drafting him over Malik Nabers. He's only 27 years old, too, so he still has plenty of years of dominance left. Then going below Nabers is Chris Olave. I think he is one of the most overdrafted players there is. I understand that in the new scheme, they're going to be funneling targets to him. However, They're stuck with Derek Carr for sure this year, probably next year. The quarterback play is just so bad. I I think he's a much better player, and if he had a much better situation around him, especially at the quarterback position, I would feel a lot more comfortable drafting him this high. But players like Drake London, he's going to be the featured wide receiver who's younger, by the way, in a Rams offense, essentially, with Kirk Cousins or Michael Penix at quarterback. I would way rather have Drake London. I could never ever take Olave over London. Anyways, though, in terms of Drake London versus Nabers, I think that could really be a toss up. And once again, a lot of this is dependent on your team build as you're in your startup drafts. So in redraft leagues, he's going off the board as the wide receiver 22 towards the end of the 5th round on average in sleeper. He's going below the likes of Deebo Samuel, Cooper Kupp. He's going above wide receivers such as DK Metcalf and Devontae Smith. Now, in terms of Nabers versus Deebo, I think that you have the potential for more upside in any given week with Deebo because Deebo is one of the highest upside wide receivers on a week-to-week basis, especially when he gets hot. However, Deebo, as we've seen, does deal with injuries quite often, and he has a very low floor from week to week, so you could debate him in Nabers. Cooper Kupp, now, in 2021, he was the Triple Crown winner, and in 2022, before he was hurt, he was the wide receiver 1 in fantasy points per game. He came back this past season, dealt with injuries for a second straight season. He was overtaken by Puka Nacua. I do expect that to generally remain the trend, but Cooper Kupp could definitely on any given week be the wide receiver 1 with the Rams. And so DK Metcalf is going below Nabers. I do like DK Metcalf, and we have seen him be a top 10 wide receiver before. He's one of the most athletic and especially size-adjusted athletes we've ever seen before. I think that's kind of a toss-up because I do like Ryan Grubb's offense this season for them as opposed to Shane Waldron's. He's going to be in the Rome Odunze role, which is, as you could tell with Rome Odunze, was quite productive for him. And Devontae Smith, he's a wide receiver 2 on his team. The only wide receiver 2 I see on this list besides him arguably is Cooper Kupp, and I would rather have Cooper Kupp than Devontae Smith, and I'd rather have Nabers than Devontae Smith. I think that DK Metcalf, Nabers, Kupp, and Deebo should be in a tier above Devontae Smith, so I do think there's a cutoff right there. I personally would probably rather have Nabers than any of these other wide receivers because I do think he's going to be by far the most targeted wide receiver here. So I do think if he's going towards the latter half of the 5th round for you, that he's a pretty good value just due to volume alone. So as you can see, Malik Nabers went 6th overall to the New York Giants. All offseason, the debate generally was after Marvin Harrison Jr., who was presumably going to go to the Cardinals and did, who was going to be the wide receiver 2 between him and Rome Odunze. All 3 were supposed to be top 10 picks, and all 3 were top 10 picks between the 3 of these receivers. Now, then the debate was, is he going to go to the Chargers at 5? Well, the Chargers elected to go O-line, so he did fall, and I use that in air quotes, to 6 to the Giants. He could have gone to a much better situation, but still, that is top 10 draft capital. So let's take a look historically at hit rates for top 10 drafted wide receivers. So as you can see, this is data compiled from 2010 to 2023 with a couple extra draft selections for the hit rates of top 10 picks because top 10 wide receivers don't come that often. When we look at this though, it's into different tiers. Superstars are elite wide receiver 1s. Studs are just wide receiver 1s in general. Then you got wide receiver 2s, 3s, solid players, players that had brief booms, players that were briefly valuable, then total busts outright. So we're going to be looking at the leftmost part of the chart. So when we look at top 10 draft picks, about 27.3% end up being superstars or elite wide receiver 1s. That's incredibly high. Then another 22.7% end up being studs, which are wide receiver 1s. Then another 4.5% end up being wide receiver 2s. 9.1% end up being wide receiver 3s. Then about another 9.1% have brief values. Then we have 27.3 just being total busts outright. Now, as I said in the Rome Odunze video, some of these, like the selection of John Ross, are just horrible draft picks that In my opinion, at least, made no sense at the time, still made no sense afterwards. And so these can be a little bit influenced by just janky selections and thought processes about players. So I do think this is skewed just a little bit in the sense of players that we think are good that get selected this high are generally going to be a little bit more bust proof than that. It's just that in and of itself, top 10 draft capital doesn't guarantee that you're good because you can select anybody you want in the top 10. They don't have to be a good player and no one has to even believe in them. You just chose that player. But regardless, when you look at this, 50% of wide receivers from 2010 to 2023, with a couple selections from 2004 to 2010 as well in this category, about 50% are going to be either elite wide receiver ones or just wide receiver ones in general. That is incredibly safe. So from a draft selection standpoint, Malik Nabers is in elite company. So among wide receivers from Power 5 conferences, this was 125 qualified candidates from 2022 to 2023. His PFF receiving grade of 91.8 ranks second. His passer rating when targeted of 125.7 ranks 12th. His total receiving yards of 2585 ranks second. His 17 receiving touchdowns ranks 8th. His yards per route run of 3.06 is 4th. His yards per reception of 16.1 ranks 20th. And his targets per route run rate of 27% ranks 21st. So to contextualize this data, his PFF grade is just what it is. He's a very good receiver all over the field, in the X, the Z, or the slot even. He's great in motion. He is best used from the slot, and I'm going to tell you something about that later. His receiving yards are incredible. It's obviously, due to his passer rating when targeted, a great idea to get him the ball. He's a very good receiving threat. Now, 14 touchdowns were this season, so that he did go from 3 to 14, which is an impressive jump. So we'll see about his touchdown production in the NFL, though. Now, his yards per route run of over 3 was good for 4th. That is absolutely impressive. Now, to contextualize that, he had Brian Thomas, who was picked 23rd overall, on the same team as him. That is very impressive to be in the top 5, considering you had a first-round wide receiver opposite of you. His targets per route run rate of 27% being 21st is still incredibly high because, once again, he had a first-round wide receiver on the opposite side. So all around, these metrics indicate that this guy is an elite prospect. Now, getting to his yards after catch ability. In my opinion, this guy is the best yards after catch prospect I have ever seen in my entire life. This guy is going to be one of the best and premier wide receivers in the NFL at yards after catch. So, for instance, he forced 30 missed tackles and 300 yards after contact in 2023, which ranked top 6 among these wide receivers. He also forced 0.31 missed tackles per reception in his career, which was 99th percentile among collegiate prospects. So once again, a devastating receiver after the catch. Now, he also averaged 0.16 first downs per route versus man coverage, which was ranked 3rd among all wide receivers since 2018. He also ranked 4th among all wide receivers from both this year's draft and last year's draft, with 2.78 yards per route run against man coverage specifically. So this guy is not only good against zone coverage, he's also elite against man coverage. So that means on 3rd downs, when teams want to use zero blitzes on Daniel Jones, he is going to make that a terrible idea. If he gets the ball in one-on-one matchups, he's gone, he's not getting tackled, and it is a free touchdown. Now, when we look at him compared to MHJ and Rome Odunze, he ranked 1st in catch rate, yards after catch, and most receiving yards per game, as well as the highest avoided tackle rate of 33.7%, although he did have the lowest average depth of target. Now, but when we look at his yards per reception, that is, once again, influenced a little bit by the fact that he is so amazing at yards after catch. But this guy, don't make any mistakes about it, can absolutely win vertically. You'll see in his route tree later. This guy is an absolute complete receiver. Then when we take a look at his explosive play rate, he was only 0.1% less than Rome Odunze at 31.3%. So this guy is a complete receiver who is devastating after the catch, is a threat to score a touchdown from anywhere on the field, and can excel against zone and man coverage. Here we have Malik Nabers' success by route chart from 2023 from Matt Harmon. Go give him a follow. He details out every route from essentially every wide receiver prospect and in the NFL, charts out how successful they are at each route, as well as the percentage of times in which they run each specific route. When we look at Malik Nabers' chart, he is above average, which is green, in all but 3 areas, which are red. He's below average at the corner, comeback, and post. So why I'm not worried about him as a vertical X is that he is above average at his 9 route as well as his curl route. So it's going to give him a vertical component to scare defenses deep, but they're not going to be able to play too far off of him because he is above average at the curl route. Now he's also going to be a horizontal weapon because he's good at his out route and his dig route. And then he's good in the short area game as well. You can see he has an above average slant route, flat route, and screen route percentage. So this guy is going to be used all over the field. You can see that he's successful in just about everything he does. I will say though, while I'm not per se worried about him from the X, one thing to note is, just like I said in the Brian Thomas video, I think it's a scheme thing and a coaching thing. He was doing a lot of shoulder dip releases and wasn't doing more complex releases like diamond releases. So there is potential for a learning curve there. I'm not sure. I just haven't really seen it. He's a really talented player, and if that's his biggest weakness, I'm not worried at all. It would just, you're not going to only be able to do shoulder dip releases in the NFL against press coverage. You have to have a variety of releases. So that is one thing to consider. But then another thing to consider is 60% of his yardage and 10 of his 14 touchdowns from this past season came from the slot. And then 30% of his total yards came from slot fades this past season. So one thing that LSU did is they lined him up in the slot. And one thing college defenses do a lot more than the NFL is run quarters coverage. So what that does is when he runs streaks and slot fades, that matches him up against safeties and man coverage a lot of the time, or, match coverage. So what that's going to do is it's going to give him a ridiculous matchup advantage against a safety, right? The NFL isn't going to per se work like that all the time. So while if that is to happen in any given situation, he'll absolutely work out and he'll be a definite matchup advantage. He's not going to be able to have 30% of his yards come from slot fades. That's just not really feasible. So that is one thing to consider with him. But regardless, he can be used as a flanker, a slot, and an X. When we look at the Giants depth chart, it's horrible from top to bottom with the exception of Malik Nabers. Personally, I don't think Daniel Jones is going to be a long-term starter for this team. I think them signing him to an extension was one of the dumbest things they could have possibly done. They set themselves back years doing that. Then they have Devin Singletary, who is below average starting running back. He's fine, but not inspiring really. Tyrone Tracy's a fine receiving back. Then obviously they have Malik Nabers, who I like, but after that it's Wan'Dale Robinson, who's a fine slot and flanker, but Then you have Darius Slayton. He's just a vertical. He's like an Alec Pierce, but maybe a little bit better than Alec Pierce. Daniel Bellinger, he's okay, I guess. Theo Johnson, I do like as a rookie tight end, but it's hard to expect too much from a rookie tight end. So there's 2 ways to look at this. The positive way to look at it is, hey, Malik Nabers is by far the most talented player in this offense. It's not even remotely close. But then the other aspect is, okay, his quarterback is pretty bad. There's no one else around him, so it's going to make it quite easy for defenses to figure out who they should be stopping on a week-to-week basis. I personally believe that overall volume I would prefer as opposed to less volume. So and what I mean by that is I would prefer defenses knowing you're getting the ball, but you still get the opportunities, rather than having a lesser piece of the pie, but not per se having quite as much defensive attention. I believe overall volume is preferable if you had to choose between the two. So as I mentioned, Daniel Jones is their quarterback. they chose to extend him. That is a thing that they did. That's about as positive I can be in that regard. When we look at his 6 games from this past season, to be somewhat fair to him, the situation was what is now, just without Theo Johnson and Malik Nabers. And Devin Singletary, there it was just Saquon Barkley and Daniel Jones. So I'll give him that, but when you look at his quarterback play, it is just terrible. Look at how many sacks, and now while that is partially due to them not having a good line, he also takes forever to throw the ball. He is a terrible processor. It was a baffling selection when they chose him 6th overall out of Duke. Just yikes all around. So why I'm telling you this is Malik Nabers is definitely not going to be helped out by Daniel Jones. Everything he does this season is going to be in spite of Daniel Jones. What I suspect they're going to do is they're going to give him a relatively low ADOT, and by him I mean Nabers, to help take chances out of, to help take things out of Daniel Jones' hands and make everything about what Malik Nabers can do. I think they're going to try to scheme him short catches so that Daniel Jones can avoid turning the ball over as much as he can manage, and allow Malik Nabers to utilize his exceptional yards after catch abilities. The picture of Daniel Jones on the bottom right here is the face I make when I watch him throw. While some Malik Nabers highlights play that exhibit everything I've mentioned throughout the video, I'm going to read off some notes I made about him. Malik Nabers is 6 feet, 200 pounds of pure athleticism. His 92nd percentile 40-yard dash speed, 85th percentile speed score, and 98th percentile burst score show us that he is not only an elite athlete, but an elite athlete by NFL standards as well. He does most of his damage from the slot, but is capable of being a flanker or X wide receiver at the NFL level. He needs to work on expanding his release package because you can't simply rely on shoulder dip releases as often as he did at LSU. Once again, that seems like a coaching issue because first-round pick Brian Thomas also exhibited the same thing on his college film, which is what leads me to believe that it is coaching and not that both of these first-round prospects happen to rely on this specific release package and didn't really perform as many of the other ones. His above-average success rate on go routes and curls should give him the ability to immediately translate as a deep threat, and his above-average dig and slant routes should allow him to be dangerous over the middle of the field and in the short area of the field as well. He is one of the best yards after catch receivers I've ever seen as a prospect and should legitimately be a number 1 receiver from day one. He has the best slot fade I've ever seen from a collegiate prospect and is one of the quickest accelerators I've ever seen, including at the NFL level. He is a walking touchdown from anywhere on the field and has the upside to be a top shelf wide receiver if he works on some of these deficiencies. My low-end comp for Malik Nabers is a Kadarius Toney that can actually catch the ball. So if you remember, Kadarius Toney coming out of Florida was often compared to a human joystick. He had electric moves in the open field, great vision, nasty juke move, spin move, everything you want, stop-start ability. Malik Nabers has all those traits, and he doesn't really have drop issues, so if he doesn't work on his release packages and doesn't ever get a little bit more crisp with his routes, I could see him being a much better Kadarius Toney in a worst-case scenario. That's not my likeliest outcome for him, though, by any means, but in a worst-case scenario. Then, in terms of his median comp, I have a Garrett Wilson before the catch and DJ Moore after the catch. So what I mean by that is Garrett Wilson does exaggerated moves to get open. He's very, very quick. He just wins against man coverage, especially as Malik Nabers did in college. And then DJ Moore after the catch is very, very, very elusive. He's very good at reading the open field and getting yards after catch. So I could see a combination of those two players in terms of, once again, Garrett Wilson's basketball-like route running to get open, and then DJ Moore's extreme elusiveness after the catch and ability to see the field. Then my high-end comp for him, if he works on the release packages and gets his route running tightened up just a little bit, he could theoretically be like an Antonio Brown that's a better athlete. So one thing about him is when he makes these cuts, he doesn't slow down in any way, shape, or form. And that's something that Antonio Brown was able to do as well. So once again, if he refines his route running, he'll first of all be able to be more technically proficient as a wide receiver, get rid of any wasted steps, and just move as efficiently as possible. And that, in combination with him being the elite 98th percentile burst score athlete that he is, with likely sub 4.4 speed in an unofficial 4.35, spells danger for defenses everywhere. He could definitely get a little bit better at the catch point in contested catch situations. That's one thing I did fail to mention. That is one of his biggest weaknesses. The good thing for him is he's so good at getting open and such an explosive athlete that he doesn't need to find himself in as many of those situations as players that are slower and less bursty do. But once again, my low-end comp is a Kadarius Toney that can actually catch the ball if he doesn't improve anything, and that's his lowest possible outcome. My median comp for him is a Garrett Wilson before the catch and a DJ Moore after the catch. And then my high-end comp, if everything goes well for him and he improves on all of these deficiencies, is an Antonio Brown that is just a better athlete. But what do you think? Do you agree with my assessment of Malik Nabers throughout this video, his strengths and weaknesses? Do you agree with my low, median, and high-end player comps for him? Let me know in the comment section below, and let me know why. What do you think about Malik Nabers? Please remember to like and subscribe. It would mean the absolute world to me if you would. Thank you, and have a good day.